welcome to all of you. I'm Eric Owens. I'm the director of the International Studies program here at Boston College, and I'm a professor in the theology department. And today I'm also wearing the hat of the organizer of the Global Citizenships project. And this workshop is one of our, I don't know, favorite parts of this project. This is number 5 in a series that's happened over the past 3 years, where we bring extraordinary people who are doing work on behalf of others around the world, doing the work that we might call the work of global citizens. And while that term has a lot of nuances to it, and people come at it from different ways, if nothing else, the term definitely means someone who is working for the betterment of the world as a whole. And there's no person that I think better exemplifies that than Mary Popeo, who is a distinguished Boston College alumna of 2014, international studies major, among other things, and a great friend of our program here. And so we're delighted, Mary, to have you with us today, and really look forward to our conversation. The way that we will proceed today is we'll begin with a round of introductions from all the students present first, or all the participants present first. And then Mary and I will talk for about 45 minutes or so by way of extended introduction and reflection on the work she does and the values she embraces and the challenges she's faced in service of that work. Then we'll break out into smaller groups for about 25 minutes or 20 minutes of conversation about your own vocational and career interests and reflecting on Mary's comments. And then we'll return to our group for about 40 minutes-ish. We'll figure out how we're doing we can be flexible on timing, to have you ask questions of Mary. And they can be direct questions about how do I connect with the person who wants to do this, or what recommendations you have for me personally. You can also ask any general questions you want, but the primary aim is for you to get the most out of that session as you possibly can, reflecting on your values and your vocational and career path that you see in front of you. Because Mary's a BC grad, she has a special experience in how Boston College can nurture these values and provide opportunities for you. And I hope that we'll make that a part of our conversation as well. And a reminder to all the students here that you all consistently inspire us faculty. It may feel that there's a weird, that there's a different relationship that we see students pass through all the time, but you're the reason we're here, and that we get up every day and feel great about the work we do. And Mary, again, great example of that. So Mary, let's get started. Thanks so much again for being here in the middle of the night for you. We're approaching the middle of the night. I wanted to get started first. Let's just explain a little bit about Peace Culture Village and what you do there, so that we have a framework for understanding what your day-to-day is like in Hiroshima right now.
Sure. Well, first of all, I am so excited to be here with all of you. I was just telling Professor Shepard and Owens, I love BC. My time at BC was so critical to what I'm doing right now. And hearing from you all, just hearing your backgrounds, what you're interested in, I am just really thrilled to meet you all. So yeah, as Professor Owens mentioned, I moved to Japan 4 years ago and co-founded a Japanese nonprofit. I know a few of you said you're interested in nonprofits. I work at a Japanese nonprofit. So I'm sure some of it translates. The nonprofit sector in Japan is not as large as in America. But anyway, we founded a peace education nonprofit incorporated here in Hiroshima, Japan. And we're a bilingual team of Japanese and Japanese young professionals who are pursuing a peace culture way of life and practicing Hiroshima-style peace education. And so basically what we're about, this is kind of big picture, is raising human consciousness through peace education steeped in the lessons of Hiroshima. So we can go into that more if you want. But aside from that, we have the raising of human consciousness. Another thing that we spend a lot of energy on is actually creating jobs in the peace field. So for young people who want to go into a career in peace, there often isn't really a way to do that. And so that's one thing we're working on. And then a third thing is really cultivating the peace culture leaders of the future and equipping them with the tools they need to change the world for the better. And so concretely, the way that we do this in Hiroshima is that we provide, so in Japan, there is a very, how to say, there's a system of school field trips. Like every school has a school field trip at the same time. Each class does it, and so many schools come to Hiroshima. So we do these school field trips. We create peace culture curriculum for schools in the Hiroshima area. We run the very first ever daily paid tour of Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. We also manage visits for foreign schools and foreign teachers that visit Hiroshima. We offer online Hiroshima experiences. And most recently, we are actually working with American partners to create AR virtual reality apps to teach about Hiroshima to increase access in, and we just got a grant to actually create hibakusha, atomic bomb survivor holograms. So
Wow.
we're doing lots of interesting stuff in the technology space as well. But essentially, we really, through the lens of Hiroshima, we're trying to encourage, especially young people, to think about big questions like, what is my mission? Why am I on this earth? How do I want to live my life? So every day I get to have those really cool conversations with amazing people in a city that's really steeped in meaning. And so it's a very cool job.
There's so much to unpack here. I want to linger for a minute on the what, um, and then we'll dig into the how and why and things. But I think it's important for you to say a few words about Hiroshima as the site of the American atomic bombing and the culture that's what does peace culture mean? I don't think there's any American example that translates or an experience that translates. 9/11 is nowhere close to what happened after that. In fact, perhaps the diametric opposite. And so can you speak for a bit about what peace means in that context and what Hiroshima means as a site for the Japanese? And then we can speak also about for an American to be there as well.
Yeah, okay, that's a really big question. So before coming to Hiroshima as a BC student, I had never learned about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in school. So basically, we're a peace education nonprofit, so we don't like to define what peace is. We really like to pull it out of the participants in our programs. But I would say the way we define it is a society in which everyone is pursuing universal well-being, right? And so I think that's very concretely manifested here in Hiroshima. So, I mean, this city experienced the atomic bombing on August 6, 1945. Incredible devastation. You know, I don't know where to begin, but the survivors today are still suffering from radiation. I work with many second and third generation bomb survivors. And I think when we're talking about peace culture, that phrase actually originated in Hiroshima. And after the atomic bombing, and I work with a lot of bomb survivors as well. The survivors talk about how they moved forward, how they rebuilt their city, and they did that so quickly. And I think something they talk a lot about is the fact that, I guess, if you don't have inner peace within yourself, you can't, this is kind of, again, very, I connect this a lot to my Jesuit values from my Jesuit education, but you can't promote peace in the world. And so these survivors rebuilt their city into a city of peace very intentionally. There was nothing in this city. And they said, okay, we're going to make peace almost our brand. We're going to make it mainstream. So even the education, everyone is mandated to learn peace education in Hiroshima. The streets are named after peace. There's a peace park, peace cafes, everything peace. And even your political platform as the mayor is connected to your peace platform. So I would say, I'm going on, but that is the peace culture of Hiroshima.
That's just so important for all of us to understand that context. And it's hard, I think it's hard as an outsider to fully capture that, because when, for example, the most recent, massive attack on the United States was when Honolulu didn't become a peace city after it was attacked by the Japanese in World War II. New York City didn't become a peace city with a peace culture after it was attacked, by hijacked planes at 9/11. This is a radical departure from the norm across human history. And so being present in that place it must have an effect on you. It must have had an effect on you when you first came into its orbit. And I wonder if you could speak to that just a little bit.
Definitely. So I think as an American visiting Hiroshima, I expected some sort of hostility or pushback, especially talking to survivors. And I was almost suspicious at how, if when I ask survivors, do they still harbor animosity towards Americans? The vast majority of them will say no, which is just kind of like, no, like how? Um, and I think it wasn't until this year that I finally had a survivor, one of the survivors I'm closest to, actually tell me, you know, I haven't forgiven America. It still hurts, but you have to move forward. You can't let that stand in the way of creating peace. And so I think for me as an American being here in Hiroshima doing this work, and often basically our services are mainly for Japanese people. Um, it's something I think about a lot.
It's a lot to carry with you, for sure. And it's complex. And I'm sure it's a lifelong journey about what that means, because you've seen more than nearly every American, having lived there and engaged in this work, the damage that it's done, and yet the possibilities that it's provided as well in a gruesome way for rebirth. And so being a part of that is something that's really unique. So what I know that you first traveled to Hiroshima on an advanced study grant, right? On an ASG. Um, Tell us how you went from being curious about Japanese culture to deciding that you might want to stay there.
Yeah, so originally I was really my first time I went to Japan, like Eric said, was on an advanced study grant because in my history class I learned about hidden Christian history. So again, thanks to BC, I was able to learn about this, but there's this really tragic history of persecution of Christians in Japan. And so when I went there, that was the first time I really came face to face with the history of the bombing. And so from that summer, I was a sophomore. And then as a junior, I received another grant from the Center for Human Rights and
International justice.
National
Yeah.
Justice. And then I was able to go to Hiroshima. And so I was able to conduct two different kind of research projects. But those experiences turned me into an activist. Like I returned to Boston and I graduated and I spent 2 years in Boston working with different organizations, creating youth coalitions surrounding nuclear weapons issues. And I would say the I was working at Harvard University, and I also, after graduating, thought that I was going to work in higher education. But I found that, Harvard is amazing, but I was basically doing secretary work. And I was feeling like, wow, I love doing this activism, but I really would like to do this as my career, not volunteer. And so that's what really drove me to move to Hiroshima, because ever since that summer that I went there for the first time, I would go back every summer for activism and things. And I thought if I move to Hiroshima, maybe I can do this as a full-time thing.
Great. Was there a moment where you knew that this was the kind of work you needed to do, or did it take a long time to pull you in? One of my colleagues and friends who at Middlebury College calls this the moment of commitment, the point at which you flash and you say the things settle comfortably and you feel like this is what I need to be doing, this is what I want to be doing. Did you have that sort of aura or realization, or did it kind of sneak up on you at some point after you had already been doing the work?
It snuck up on me. I mean, when I went to Japan, it was to help co-found this organization with my mentor, who was the former chairman of the museum. So he actually asked me, "Hey, Mary, do you want to come help me start this?" And I was like, "Yes." But it wasn't until about 3 years into our work, uh, our organization was about to go bankrupt. And so, you know, I suddenly realized, and, like, so basically all of our staff had to quit. And I realized, like, if I want to do this, I have to take responsibility and do this. So I think that was the point where I had to decide, like, do I want to go home? And then I actually did go home and I talked to Eric about graduate programs and all of this. And I eventually decided to stick it out here.
Well, one of the things, as I recall, was that your initial work there was revolved around I don't know the proper way to describe it, an eco village or a peaceful living environment, or you'll have to describe what that means. But you weren't, as I recall, your first stop wasn't to be leading tours downtown. You were doing something much longer, with a much longer time frame and a little different focus. And could you speak a bit about the connection between that work and sort of lifestyle, and in particular, the sort of connection to environmental justice that comes with it?
Of course. So when I originally went to Japan, I moved to the middle of nowhere in the countryside, and Peace Culture Village was an eco village. It was essentially a place where we wanted to create a model community that was pursuing peace culture, whatever that was. And so, we had about 300 people from all over the world come stay with us in these Japanese farmhouses, and we did organic farming. We taught English to the locals. We did these peace education programs. And so that was a very intense 3 years of living in a home with no heat. We chopped wood every day for our fireplace. We worked every morning. Everyone woke up. We had meditation as a community. Then we went out and worked on the farm. Then and ate every single meal together and did not have any privacy. It was an extremely unique and intense experience. But I would say definitely that um, sustainability was our original aim with Peace Culture Village. And thinking about a peace culture way of life, sustainability is really inseparable from that. And in Japan and in our current work, we do a lot with the SDGs. So we're definitely still trying to work toward that as well.
The UN Sustainable Development Goals, for those who haven't come to them yet. So, okay, this is terrific, and I think participants here can already see how deeply embedded you are in this work, that it's not a job for you, that this is a calling, and that it touches all sorts of lives, and also already getting a taste of your entrepreneurial energy that has led to so many new things over the past few years. Let's center our conversation for a few minutes around the why. I mean, what kind of person does this kind of work is a way of asking that question as a virtue theorist, or thinking around the sort of moral dimensions of this. What kind of person does this? And let's hear a little bit about what kind of person you think you want to be, and what kind of values center you in the work that you're doing, and then we can kind of dig in on different areas around those.
Sure. So I think for me personally, I'm Catholic. That is an extremely large part of my life, of who I am. And I think my Jesuit education was extremely important in forming who I was. Um, I think that the type of person who does the work that I'm doing does not care primarily about making money, first of all. Um, maybe has maybe is slightly egocentric, um, and really wants to, I mean, I I really want to do something that will impact the world, that will, um, I think, Andrew was talking earlier about mission-driven work. That is what drives me, the mission. And it's kind of like this epic mission or adventure. People who are seeking that, um, I think would do this type of work.
Hmm. So over the course of your time that I've known you, you've been deeply connected with Catholic and Jesuit. You've been connected with Quakers, pacifists, and the American Friends Service Committee and other adjacent units. And you work with Buddhists and non-religious people in Japan to a large degree, I know. How do you manage the different ethics and traditions and conversations that motivate people in your orbit in peace work? How do you think about what it means to work for peace across these lines? Does it mean that dogma or that particular beliefs have no relevance, and we're all on the same path? Do you think that it's an obstacle when we have differences like this? Is it? I don't want to put words in your mouth, of course. Tell me what your experience has been like working across ecumenically and interreligiously and with non-religious people in the service of something so big.
That is such a key question. So actually, our team at PCV, we have about, 3 core staff and then about 40 people who work part-time. Um, but we are very intentional, not in our publicity, but in our core. We are very intentionally spiritual organization. Um, our mission is very spiritual and we see it that way and we talk about it with that language quite a lot. I went from being someone who was completely surrounded by only Catholics to being the only Christian that anyone knows. so so I think for me the first couple years it was okay, but especially since we are very intentionally now talking about spirituality and what that means, it has been very challenging for me. Um, because I think, again, Japan is a country with a deep spirituality, but also with a lot of trauma surrounding organized religion. So, you know, mm, people al- almost every I would say everyone I work with believes that there's no reason to separate people in terms of religion and that everyone is basically worshiping the same god or thing, force. For me that has been very challenging to even explain why it's important that there's differences among religions. And then I second guess myself. I'm like, oh, am I wrong? I think when you move to another country, you're constantly going to be the one adapting, especially if you're in a country as different as Japan. So that's definitely been a challenge and still is a huge challenge for me.
Yeah, thank you. I think I want to also talk about other challenges you face, because there's no question that moving to any place that feels foreign to you or feels alien is a challenge. And then moving somewhere with such a unique culture that's so distinct from the American culture, and the language differences, culture, and it resonates in ways, like you said, around what organized religion means here is very different than the sort of emperor worship history that comes in Japan, and all of the cultural touchstones feel different, I'm sure. And so, what are some of the other challenges that you've faced in your time there that have been a part of your work or have stopped you from doing some of the work you want to do?
So I would say this might not so much be because of Japan, but it's if you're trying to start an organization in a country that's not the US and you're not actually a citizen of that country, there are a lot of very difficult things that go along with that, including visa, including, of course, language and like having to write articles of incorporation in a language that's not yours. It, or I would say being away from family has been really, really challenging for me. But then things like, again, if you want to found a nonprofit, lack of funds. Also, if you want to create your own organization, you don't get vacation. Like, I am responsible for this organization and I work until the work is done. So work-life balance has been a challenge. But of course, I think in Japan specifically, the language and the culture. I almost, when I'm in Japan, I have a Japanese persona. And that's also really challenging because no one's going to understand you when you make a reference to that movie that everyone in America knows, right? So like that's been a huge challenge, is kind of recreating myself using a language that I don't really know. So yeah, all of these are kind of transferable no matter what country you move to, perhaps, if there's another language.
So 5 years in, have some of these diminished with new friendships and language skills and all of this, or what remains? What of those remain 5 years into your work now?
So I would say I'm pretty settled as a person who lives in Japan. I still cannot get a credit card. I've been refused so many times for some reason. But I would say, like, when you're surrounded by people of that culture who are supporting you, there are certain things that get a lot easier. Um, for example, I live in a share house, so I don't have to worry about like certain things. But I will say that the longer I'm in Japan, the more challenging the culture actually becomes, because
Mm.
the better I get at the language and the more accustomed I get to the culture, the more is expected. Like if you're a foreigner that's just come to Japan, no Japanese person is going to expect you to know things. But for example, I was in a meeting the other day and I crossed my legs. Bad. I kept my scarf on. Bad. I accepted documents with one hand. Bad. Like I'm still even now learning all these things. And I think self-care is still a huge issue for me. Like giving myself a day off is a struggle. So I would say some of that's still there. The money has gotten better. We are now we've gone from, we are a nonprofit, but we're going much more in the direction now of like social business almost. So I think working with corporations has actually really helped us in that regard.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because in one of my promo emails for this, I describe you as a social entrepreneur, and I think that certainly fits. Can you say a little bit about how that work has expanded, how you're bridging corporate models of entrepreneurship and relationships with corporations, but also governments and philanthropic organizations? How have you made that move?
Yeah.
And what's it?
So the great thing
How do
about
you describe? Yeah.
nonprofits is that they can do everything. Like nonprofits they can work with donations, they can have members, but they can also get grants and they can also work with corporations. And so basically, when we were an eco village, we were running only on donations. And we very quickly realized that was not going to be sustainable for us, which is why we moved into the city and we worked on creating sustainable business models. For us, what that means is we create content, and we work with lots of different organizations to package that and to sell it to different groups. So we work with travel companies. We work with uh, people who organize these school field trips. We work with, um, you know, like that's kind of our business model. So we're a very small team, but because we partner with these larger organizations that package and sell what we create, it works.
So what separates you from a tourism company?
Um, what separates us from a tourism company? I would say that our identity is peace education. So we do tourism related things, but we're very small. So we ask tourism companies to handle all the office work involved and like all of the talking with the clients, and we just do the program.
Great. I mean, I think the answer is clear to me, but as you move into these different areas, I'm curious how you're defining yourselves, and you're starting to work with corporations as well. Can you say a word about the presentation that you have collaborated on to carry the message of the peace culture, and how you're starting to speak to groups outside of Hiroshima on about that?
Yeah. Well, I would say one thing is there's a very negative stigma about peace and business in Hiroshima. So we do have to be careful with the messaging. Basically, the reason we're going in this direction is because we believe that once the survivors are no longer here, if people continue doing this work volunteer, it won't happen. And especially for young professionals, we want there to be an option for them. But it is risky. And we did have to do a lot of talking with a lot of people before we came out and we were like, everything we do is going to be paid. But I would say, now I think, Eric, this is what you're referring to. So we're working with partners in the United States to do programs for people abroad. So this is our online programs called Peace Portal. We have a lot of different things that we do. But for example, on Monday, we're actually giving a Hiroshima peace experience online to 260 all-state employees. So I think one thing that's really cool about going this social business route is I'm from an activist background, but if we do this for activists, we're just preaching to the choir. It's really fun to be able to do this for people who maybe have never learned about Hiroshima before. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to highlight how creative you're being in bringing a core value of peace education to so many different groups. I mean, the intentionality of their living environment is must be sustaining for you personally, but you're also outward facing. You're not monastic, of course,
Mm.
and you're working for the betterment of Hiroshima and Japan, but also the world in different ways. And you're doing this through digital work and physical work and training and engagement with young people and employment. This is a really, really ambitious work that you're doing, and it's multifaceted. And I wonder how it weighs on you, the burden of leadership and the burden of responsibility and the burden of working for something that is a very long-term, generational, multi-generational goal. How do you carry that weight with you when you wake up every day?
It's really challenging, especially because, as Eric said, when you enter a community, it's really the long game, right? Like this kind of became my mission, and it is very high pressure. We are asking for money for things that historically have been volunteer. And so we need to be very professional, and we need to make sure everything we do is spot on. And it's, there's so many eyes looking at us because we're the next generation. And I'm also American. It's very, very challenging.
So, what are the sorts of practices that you undertake to sustain yourself through that?
Mhm.
We've talked about some of the challenges, the cultural challenges, and the business challenges and social challenges. What kinds of practices are you undertaking to keep this sustainable in your own life, to do the work medium term and maybe long term as well?
Yeah. I think one huge thing for me is my family. Like I talk to my family all the time. They are my pillar, like who I am. They know who I am. So I think talking to my family has been huge. My faith has been huge. There is a very, very small Christian community in Japan. And also just my teammates. Like it is thanks to my teammates that I'm able to do anything in this country. Like as an American, if you decide to work in Japan, you become a child. And like I can't even make an invoice correctly. So for me as a leader, it's hugely humbling that I can do nothing without the support of all of my team. So I think they also really help me to be resilient and keep going.
And finally, I want to spend a little time hearing your thoughts about the concept of global citizenship.
Mhm.
Um, how does this concept come into your orbit? And you do work with the United Nations, I know, and with other organizations there. Tell us a little bit about what that concept means, how it translates literally and metaphorically in Japan and in peace work.
Mhm. So I think global citizenship is something we do programs on. And I don't think the definition is that much different from like pursuing peace culture, actually. But I think for me, um, maybe the most important thing is a willingness and a curiosity to learn about diverse perspectives, right? And it can be really, really challenging, especially when you're in an environment where nobody understands you, to be open to understanding everybody else or trying your best to adapt. So I think that has been huge training for me. And when I was in the US, I didn't really, at BC, of course, I explored different things, but I did it from the safety of my home environment. So I think global citizenship, when we do workshops, we tell the Japanese students, you don't have to go abroad to be a global citizen, but you do have to be open and curious to listening and learning from what other people who are different from you have to say.
So in the unique context of Japanese nationalism, um, does global citizenship resonate as something that's threatening to Japanese identity, or is it something that's seen as complementary?
Interesting question. So this is just my observation, but the number of Japanese students who are studying abroad has decreased even before COVID. And for example, if you're good at English, you often get bullied in school. Like in Japan, to be different is it's not good to be different. So I think if you have an interest, generally, I think if as a Japanese person, you have an interest in abroad, really want to go there, want to learn different languages, that makes you stick out. And that is not viewed favorably all the time. I think that does have connections to Japanese nationalism. But yeah, it's people that I work with, because our team is bilingual. I wouldn't say that they are normal Japanese folks.
Mm. Well, that's so interesting. I've got a million more questions, but I want to let this resonate a little bit, sit with people. And I'd like us to break into some groups to talk about what you've just heard and reflect on this a little bit, and as it resonates in your own experience as students and people who are thinking about your future life and work. I'm going to break you up. I'm going to try to do this manually. I'm not great at doing breakout groups on this, so bear with me for a second. I'm going to put you in groups of 3, and we'll plan on 20 minutes so everybody has some time to reflect. And the primary questions to reflect on are, impressions from what you've just heard. And second of all, share your own stories with one another about how you're reflecting about your future vis-a-vis service in the world, service for the world, service in the world, service at home for the greater good, etc. What that might mean to you, and some of the obstacles you see, whether they're internal obstacles or perceived external obstacles, or very direct obstacles from parents or something like that, or colleagues or whatever. Let's take 25 minutes or so. I'll pop in and out of those, and then we'll come back and you can ask, reflect with comments, or ask questions to Mary directly about how all of this impacts you. So well, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for taking that time to get to know each other and share your ideas in the small breakout groups. This last section of time that we have until 11 o'clock is really yours to reflect on what you heard from the first session, to about how that relates to your own sense of principles and purpose, and vocational and career ambition, or also to ask follow-up questions to get more details about any of that we talked about earlier. So I'd like to just open the floor up for your questions, and if there's lots at one time, we can have you raise your digital hands. But for right now, let's start with audio questions. Just raise your hand visually, and I'll call on you, and then we can go from there. Anara, you had a beginning question here. Why don't you start us off?
So our group kind of tried to apply like the concepts you were sharing about peace and how we might implement it at home. So could you please like sort of apply like some of the principles of your peace education to like the US context? And what is the role that governments and institutions have after an event like this? Do they need like a peace platform too?
Okay, great question. Thank you. And I'm so excited to hear all of your questions. Eric was telling me you had some great conversations going in breakout sessions. So to be honest, we as a team of course, want to expand beyond Hiroshima. But as someone who's really entrenched in this work in Japan, it's been really difficult for me to think about translating this to the American context. And we've been thinking about that. But I think in America, for example, every state has a different education system, right? So I guess it depends on what you're thinking about. Peace education, like formal education system, or more experiential education outside of school, or whatnot. But I think even at colleges, universities, right? There's a lot of classes about war and not a lot about peace and what peace is. So I definitely think it's a paradigm shift. Like in Hiroshima, it's just the way it is. People talk about peace. But in America, it's a paradigm shift. So it's a really big question. How can we work peace education? Yeah, exactly, right? Like, and even people who study peace, um, it might be a lot about war, preventing war. So positive peace versus negative peace. So I think that's a really great question that I'm still trying to figure out too. Um, as for the role of institutions and governments after a collective trauma, um, is what you're referring to, like, for example, like the American government vis-a-vis Japan, or the American government vis-a-vis America? Like,
Oh, just like for those countries within their own countries, like America versus like whoever did 9/11 versus like Hiroshima and like, yeah.
so I'm not sure what the right answer is, but in it, from the perspective of Hiroshima, the United States has never apologized for what it did. And the majority of the survivors accept that. Well, actually, the majority, I would say many survivors do not expect an apology from America, which for me was shocking. Another thing is the survivors actually lobbied a long time to get support from the government of Japan, and it was an uphill battle. But now, if you can prove that you were within 2 kilometers of the hypocenter within 2 weeks of the bombing and have 2 witnesses, you can actually get free medical care from the Japanese government. So I think one important role would be the support of those survivors. And actually now, again, this might be getting into the weeds, but there's a new international treaty that entered into force in the United Nations last month called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, that has made nuclear weapons illegal under international law. And all of the signatories and ratifying states of that treaty actually agree to support the survivors monetarily within their own jurisdictions and without, like outside of their jurisdiction. So not only that state government, but also on an international scale now, people are supporting the survivors. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it reveals how little we hear the word peace in our own discourse. And whether it's inaugural addresses or campaign speeches or speeches on the Senate floor, peace is so rarely spoken as a word that it can be shocking to actually see the numbers on that. What other questions do you have? Yeah, Cassie.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like just your move abroad in general, how that like has gone over. I think when I think about moving abroad, I struggle a lot about thinking about missing out on things with my family and my friends, like kind of just living like a separate life from all of that. And then kind of going along with that, last like February, March, when all the borders were closing, just like if you could speak a little bit about how you felt in that moment, and how it felt to be in a different country and so far away from all your family and everything like that.
Great question. I think hands down the most difficult part of living abroad for me is being away from my family. Thankfully, my family is quite supportive of the work that I'm doing, so I don't get a lot of pushback. But I think honestly, I do not think I expected to be in Japan this long when I first moved to Japan. I thought, oh, like this is a fun project. Who knows what will happen? Um, but it's turned into my career. So I would say missing out on things is hard. It's really, really hard. Like my grandfather actually passed away last month, and no one was able to gather. We had an online funeral and everything, but it was very hard not being home for that. And when the borders closed, yes, it was very stressful. My parents were like, "You need to come home," and I was like, "I cannot come home. I am responsible for this organization." um, so yeah, I think that was a moment where, and even now I generally go home once a year, thinking I can't meet my family when I want to is kind of a traumatic thing to think about. And so I think it's definitely a sacrifice. Living, that's for me has been a big sacrifice.
And what was, I think also she was curious about the initial pandemic response. I guess you answered that a little bit about, they wanted you to come home immediately. But yet you're coming back now,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So full disclosure, I am in 3 days coming to the US. And I'll basically be quarantining and then going home and quarantining. So I'll be gone a month. But the reason is because I am going a little bit crazy. There are no foreigners in Hiroshima right now. I am working completely in Japanese with all Japanese people, and I have completely lost the sense of who I am. So I think for my self-care, and thankfully my staff is very supportive, I am going home to recenter, to rebuild, to prepare myself for the next year of not being able to go home, basically. So I think like everyone has their own limits, but especially when you're in another culture. For me, I just explained to my staff, I was like, I just need this. I need this every year. I need to go home to a place where I don't have to fight to be understood. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Other comments, questions? Yeah, Ayana.
I have a question kind of similar to that. I was wondering, like, to what degree do you feel that you had acquired the language before you moved there, and how has that been challenging? Just because for me personally, I'm taking Japanese, and with all of the kanji that I'm learning, I'm like, I don't know how I would ever be able to like do this if I actually went there.
Who are you taking Japanese with?
This year I have Sullivan.
I love Sariban Sensei. Tell her konnichiwa for me.
I will.
Yeah, no, without my 4 years of Japanese at BC, life would have been so much more challenging. That was huge for me. And all the Japanese professors are awesome. But the first time I came to Japan, I had only taken 2 years of Japanese. And so barely spoke at all. And then basically what happened is I was coming to Japan every year for activism, but I would say it was not until I moved here that I became functional as a human in Japanese. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like if you are considering moving to Japan and you do have a few years of Japanese under your belt and you are, interested in continuing to learn, I basically learned on the job. So you will pick it up. And as for kanji, I have become so much better at reading this year just because everything has become online, emails. I come home to like 80 missed Facebook messages from all my Japanese coworkers, and I'm just like, oh my God. But Google Translate, lifesaver. So if you do it, if you use it, then you pick it up. I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Great, thanks. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Christopher.
I think one thing I was wondering is like with all that's going on in the world, just all the time. How do you not get jaded with, and then second, how exactly do you think it's possible to foster like a global culture of peace, and how would you go about doing that in like an ideal world?
I'm gonna have to think on that second question. The first question, sorry, can you repeat the first question?
Yeah, the first part I think was like, when you think of like everything that's going on in the world, how do
Right.
you not
Okay.
get like a little bit jaded?
Yeah. So I would say um there, and this might be a little bit specific, but there is an energy in Hiroshima that is pretty incredible right now. So you have the survivors getting older. They're calling on the next generation to take over their mission, but at the same time they're very hesitant to do so because no one can tell their stories like them. And then you have these young people who on the one hand are very not really excited about taking on this trauma, but at the same time are really excited to do it their way. And so there is this large this community of young people in Hiroshima who are now taking on this kind of epic mission. We're all supporting each other's projects. We're all doing it in different ways, but it's kind of like the Peace Avengers. Like I don't know how to describe it, but for me, the work that we do, although it's coming from a place of tragedy, it's all about the future. It's all about how are we as young people going to move forward. And so I think that's what really keeps me going is the energy and the vision of all of these incredible young people that we're working with and we're creating the future together. So I would say finding people like that, finding people who like for me, I hate change. When all of our programs were canceled due to coronavirus, I cried and all my coworkers were like, this is a great opportunity to do something new. And I was like, okay, sure. So like, I think being around people like that has helped me a lot. And then how to cultivate a global peace culture. I mean, I would say as a peace educator, education is where I would start. But I think another really important thing is getting yourself around people who are global. And now that we're doing these things online, it's become a lot easier. But for me, when I was living at an eco village with people from all over the world with barely any privacy, just living became peace culture training, I guess. It was like a microcosm of that. So I don't know. I think it's a tough question, but it has to start with the local, I suppose.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, Edmund Burke is a political philosopher who talks about how you can't neglect the little platoons, the units closest to you when thinking about global affiliation and identity and things. And sometimes our practice for learning to love the distant other is learning to love the complicated close by person. And that's can be challenging. I think I mean, we've discussed that a little bit. Your time living in close quarters in your eco village, it wasn't always pacific because you had to navigate real human dimensions. And I think I've heard you say, and you're saying now a bit that helps you in some meaningful way to expand that vision as well. Do you think it's possible to think about the world around you without that sort of close living intentionality, or is that something we all naturally come by and we're all neighbors to someone, and so we all have access to that, or do we need to focus on one before the other?
Focus on global before local or vice versa?
Yeah.
So based on what I hear from the bomb survivors, it is very important to start inward and work outward. So I would say yes. But for example, I think one, and again, one amazing thing that you all have going for you is you all are Boston College students. You have so many resources at your disposal. And so I would say like, if you want to, like, for example, my colleague was, when we started working together, he's like, Mary, we're going to give a speech at the UN someday. And I was like, okay. And like, it's happening. So I think you all have the resources and the power to actually go to that global level if you want. So, it is important to start with the local, but I think, you you can also go all the way if you want.
Mhm.
Both are important.
Yeah, good. What other Mary? You had a question, I think. You had your hand raised earlier.
Yeah, I want to ask, like, who is your staff? And also, you had mentioned that you weren't planning on being in Japan for a while, and now you're here. So you spoke to that a little bit, but do you feel like, I don't know, your work you feel is mission driven, and do you feel like there's someone that can fill your shoes, or do you feel like this is something that you need to continue doing? Yeah.
That's a huge question. I'll answer that first. So, I have pondered recently, like, oh, I would love to go to grad school. Oh, I would love to travel. And right now I cannot. Like, it is a responsibility that I have, and I have committed to doing this. So I do have moments where I'm kind of in my head like, wow, I'm almost like, this is my child, you know? Um, but I think, you know, mm, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Can you guide me again?
Yeah, so you were saying like this is so important to you, and the more that you've worked here, like the more you
Ah,
realize
can
the
someone
impact
fill my
that you're
shoes?
having. Yeah.
Right. So this is another, my coworkers tell me all the time. Okay, Anara, thank you so much. I liked your emoji reactions. See you. But my coworkers tell me all the time, Mary, we really need you. Because when we do peace education, I'm the one who's providing the perspective. So I work, you asked who is my staff. So let me show you. This is our staff. This is our website. I'm sharing my screen with you. And so here's me. And then my coworkers, these two are the two that we're full-time employees at PCV. And so these two are third generation bomb survivors. And then the rest of the folks we work with are, for example, our peace education team, they all work full-time at a travel company, which is awesome. But yeah, we have, again, these 3 full-time staff, Steve, who is kind of like our symbolic leader, and then about 40 part-time people who are in their 30s, 20s, and 10s, and all of them are Japanese except for one who is from the UK. So that's who our team is. It is the best part about this work. They are fantastic. They have energy. They're changing the world. It's super inspiring working with them all. But yes, I often have minor freakouts about the fact that I don't know if I can find someone to fill my shoes. So, but I think that goes to show that there is a real need. Like in Hiroshima, there is a need for foreigners to come and do this work, but there's no way for them to do that because they can't get a job and get a visa to be here. So I think hopefully PCV can create more jobs in the peace field in Hiroshima so more foreigners can come here and do this work.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks. Alex, did you have your hand up earlier?
Yeah, my question is kind of a full 180 from the present, but I talked about in my group, like as a sophomore, I still don't really know what I fully want to do. And I was wondering, like, what were you thinking, like, while you were at college? And did you ever think that this is where you would end up, so to say?
No, I did not. My life plans never work, but I love to make them anyway. So I imagined that I would be working at a think tank or maybe working in higher education. I think those were my 2 kind of life plans. And yeah, I mean, I did that. I did try that. I found out that I don't like research so much. So not really good for think tank. And then I also found that working in higher education or in a lot of different fields, you have to climb the ladder until you actually get to do cool stuff. And I was just really impatient and I was like bored. So, I would say like what I'm doing right now, I think is great, but it all came so organically just based on opportunities that I had and people that I met. I did not plan any of this. And so I think that will happen to you all too. And it's totally okay to not know what you're going to do with your life right now. Yeah. I mean, I like to plan. So for me, that was stressful, but my coworkers would be like, no, that's the fun of it, not knowing. So yeah, the
Well,
sky is the limit.
I'm sure that people would be interested to hear more about your BC experience and any tips you might have for, pathways, organizations, classes, experiences, retreats, internships, the whole works. What are the things that built up to either give you the courage to do this, or the skill set, or the experience to learn what you didn't want to do? Which is, frequently just as important. We heard a little bit about that. You work with CSIS and not wanting to choose that path. But tell us more about your BC experience.
Okay, I would say, hands down, the most important thing for me, getting me to here, has been mentorship. So you seek out professors or people you really think are cool, and you learn from them, or like, for example, Eric was my professor, and I applied to work at the Boise Center, and I got rejected once. And I was like, oh, this is the worst, so sad. And then I went to Japan and applied again, and it worked. So, and Eric has become a huge, amazing mentor for me. So I think the professors at BC are amazing resources, and they will be your cheerleaders no matter what you end up doing when you graduate. So I think one of my regrets is that I wasn't better at actually fostering relationships I made when I was in Boston working at these different schools. So mentorship is huge. Another thing is BC has a lot of money for all of you. So I would say you apply and use that money. Like, the first time for the ASG, honestly, my motivation in applying was, I'm an RA and I can't study abroad in the summer, but I still want to go abroad. That was like my original reasoning. And it ended up changing my life. So I would say take advantage of those grants. They were huge. And then also, when I was at BC, there was a program called BC Talks, which is kind of like TED Talks. I really enjoyed opportunities where I love to talk, I love to present. And I think there were a lot of opportunities at BC that allowed me to step in front of my peers and really present things that I was interested in. So those are a few things, I suppose.
That's terrific. Thanks. Yeah, Zayed.
Okay, I'm just amazed by the organization and the mission that you follow. I mean, for many ways, I feel connected to you because as an immigrant in the United States and coming here and adapting, I can relate so much. But I'm also right now, I'm looking at the organization and I'm like, I wish there was a global organization like this that can promote, peace everywhere. So my question, I guess, is, are you seeing your company right now, and I mean your organization, where you at right now? Are you considering of expanding to different like city in Japan, or even are you looking at different countries, or even are you planning to collaborate with different organizations that have the same mission in different countries?
Great question. So the goal, because I don't want to live in Japan for the rest of my life, the goal is to expand, definitely. So this year, our goal is to go from Hiroshima to Japan. And then hopefully a few years down the line, we'll be going from Japan to outside Japan. But one way we're doing this is by making as much of our work as we can online. I think that's going to be a really important step for us. So this online salon we're creating will be online, and we're going to use it to kind of, again, cultivate these young people that we work with so that they can educate students when they come to Hiroshima and things like that. But yeah, I wish there were more organizations. I think one huge issue that we've run into as an organization is the lack of business and management acumen in the nonprofit community. And so I think, it wasn't until my business partner entered the organization that we were really able to become sustainable. So I think like we were talking about before, matching this mission-driven epicness and the skills. Hopefully more, we can keep going with that.
Terrific. Thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure you put your email address and some other links on the chat as we approach the end of, we've still got 20 minutes, but you know, I personally am so fascinated to see how your work with Google goes, and the sort of mapping projects and virtual reality projects, and now this hologram project. Can you say just a little bit more about that, because that's obviously core to this mission of lifting it out of its physical context, in addition to the physical context, and putting it globally and making these things accessible around the world. What's that work been like, and how do you see that moving forward?
Yes. So this is kind of a crazy story, but my business partner somehow got connected with this American AR VR company called Time Looper. And they make AR and VR experiences for historical and environmental sites for education. And so they really wanted to do something in Hiroshima. And so we created a free iPhone app called Explore. Go ahead and download it. It's free on the App Store. It's called Explore Hiroshima, which allows people to walk around Peace Park and explore and things. And so we created this app for free, both of us. It took a lot of time and effort. And then we presented it at an event hosted by the United Nations last August. That kind of exploded. Like, the governor of Hiroshima was there. We've now received tons of funding from Hiroshima Prefecture to do this work. The Undersecretary General of the United Nations was there. She met with the emperor and told the Japanese emperor said that he liked our app. It was like in the news. My coworker's like crying. It's like the Pope saying that he likes your app or something. So like, yeah, it has been a crazy ride. We have received a couple of really large grants, which on the one hand is awesome. On the other hand is terrifying, because now we have to produce results. But on the 20th, we will actually be doing our very first atomic bomb survivor hologram, where our friend who's a survivor will be in front of a green screen with all these dots all over her, and she'll give her testimony. And we're collecting this archive of survivor hologram footage so that when holograms are a thing, like, actually imagine you're in an auditorium and like a survivor's like in front of you. When that technology becomes available, we will have this footage. Like, it's just really kind of crazy to think about, but it's also really exciting. So that's a cool thing happening.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you. This is really, and it taps into all these other organizations around the world that do oral histories and trying to reclaim languages and experiences and wisdom from the past. That is just irreplaceable, and taps into other sources of funding, of course, as well, that make that doable. So anyway, let's turn back to students. What other questions do you have or comments? Yeah, Christopher.
I think one other question I had, I was really curious about when you said you started, you found out that the donations maybe weren't going to be sustainable, so you started working with corporations. And you mentioned like you have a meeting with Allstate, for example. I'm just curious as to what the reception from these different corporations has been to your like peace education.
Yeah, so Allstate we haven't done yet. It's on Monday, so we'll see how that goes. I'm curious myself, but I would say when I say we work with corporations, we work with them to sell our content. So we haven't actually yet educated, like done corporate responsibility education. Like, I think we want to get more into that, but right now what we're doing is it's like, over many years, we've been fostering relationships with people who share our vision, and they happen to work for certain companies, like Dentsu, which is one of the, like, a huge company in Japan, or like JTB. Like, these are all really big Japanese companies. But I think it's really finding people who share your mission and working with them. It has really, really helped us. And yeah, it's been an interesting transition that's taken quite a bit of work. But I would really like to work more with people who aren't peace activists, because I'm curious too about how the message will be received, especially when we talk to foreign audiences. We try to talk a lot about Hiroshima's message of resilience and less about actually eliminating nuclear weapons, because that is often quite political. So we'll see. We might have to fine tune our messaging a little bit.
Other questions, comments?
Ask me anything.
It's an AMA here. We got a few minutes left. It's wide open. Yeah, say it.
So I don't know how to put this together, but I struggle to understand a little the part about peace, because we talk about peace, and I just want to get to know, the culture and how they see peace there, because I'm not looking at the United States right now, but I'm looking like countries like Iraq, where bombing are happening every single day. But at the same time, I've talked to a couple of people from Iraq before, and they do see it as like they can't forgive Americans of what happened, because this is their daily life, of like seeing these bombings happening every single day and literally killing their families. So is it like part of the system that is more like, let's follow a more peaceful path? Or what is exactly different about, the Japanese culture, different from why people from like Iraq or different areas that are experiencing catastrophic, things right now are not following that path, I guess?
So the question is, what about Japanese culture made Hiroshima's peace culture possible, maybe? And I think one really important thing to note is that Japan lost the war. Like, it was a very clear end to the conflict. They didn't have any choice. The Americans occupied them and life went on. But it's not like some of these other conflicts that are very much ongoing, right? So like during the conflict, I don't think Japan was all about peace, but they had to move forward after the war. And actually, a lot of survivors talk about how they completely detested and were terrified of Americans until the occupying forces came in and gave them food and brought jazz and candy. And then over time, they were just like, oh, these people aren't so bad. So I think, the context is very different. Another thing to mention is that Japan is a very homogeneous country. So talking about like, international conflict is one thing, but even like domestic conflict, it's so different from the US, where there's not as much diversity. So I think there's a lot of very Japan specific things that might have led to what, how people ended up accepting the situation and choosing to move forward.
For sure. And that's exactly what confused me, is the part about like, Japanese are kind of like nationalists in the sense of like, they don't like change as much. So I would assume, they would stick to that, like, we're not gonna, because I was surprised, honestly, when you said we're not expecting any apologies from the United States. And considering that Japanese are kind of like nationalists, I'm like, how does that go? But I want to go back to your point of like, I think part of it is like about the spiritual, and kind of like that spirit they follow is definitely different from many different countries and just around the world. Maybe that follows, you can talk about that more. Does that follow more a peaceful path or what?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, like, as far as the Japanese government is concerned, the Japanese are protected by America's nuclear umbrella. So the way that their post-war, like, international security is comprised, they basically rely on the US for their international security. So that's one reason why they do not need an apology from the US. But then as far as spirituality is concerned, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I would say, you know, indigenous religion is Shinto. Buddhism is also, there's a huge influence from Buddhism. But ever since World War II, organized religion has become very dangerous because the Japanese were fighting for the emperor, right? And the emperor turned out to not be a god like everyone thought he was. And then there have also been incidents of religious terrorism in Japan in recent years that have made people very suspicious of organized religion. But Japanese spirituality, they very much take pieces of things that fit Japanese culture from a bunch of religions and just mush them together into Japanese spirituality, right? So I think one thing that I've actually struggled a lot to understand is Japanese people are very accepting of differences. It's like whatever floats your boat, sure, like in that way. So like for example, I talk with my friends a lot about my faith, and they're just like, why does it matter if everyone worships the same God? And I was like, I've never even thought that that was a question someone could ask, like, right? But I think it's I wonder if maybe, you know, that spirituality, that kind of acceptance, like, oh, I'm Buddhist, but I go to the shrine this day, and when I get married in a church. Who cares? Like, that might have something to do with it. I don't know.
Any last questions from students before we move to our wrap-up portion? Well, Mary, I want to give you an opportunity if you have any parting words for us. We've put upon you all of the questions today without really giving you an opportunity to say what you wanted to say. If you have any parting words, I welcome those, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming. I was telling, I think Eric earlier, that like when I talk to BC students, I remember how smart I used to be as a student, and I'm just like so wowed by you all. Like you're learning so much amazing stuff. You have so many resources at your fingertips. I'm just really excited for all of the things that you're going to do. And hearing from all of you about all of your different interests. You're all from really diverse backgrounds in terms of what you're studying. And I just really want to thank you for sharing your time and everything with me today. And if there's any way that I can be of use to you, or if you're interested in coming to Japan or whatever, like please feel free to email me. I am so thrilled, especially because I feel very isolated here in Japan at the moment. Like I would be thrilled to be involved with whatever you have going on. So I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to meet you all.
Thank you, Mary. Could you put your email address in the chat for people? So I'd like to also ask the students here, if you, in the next, couple hours, if you have 5 minutes free, to take just a minute to reflect on what this conversation has brought up for you, has made you think about, or if it was useful in whatever ways, and drop me an email. I'm trying to, Mary knows this as well, but I think, first of all, it's important to get feedback and to see how events go and how you might, expand who comes and what it means for you and things like that. But it also helps me to tell other people what a conversation like this can do for you and how it can be meaningful to help raise money to continue them, and to help share the story with other people. So that's my one request of you all, is spend 5 or 10 minutes to think a little bit about what you got out of today and what it makes you think about, and send it to me in an email. If you don't want me to share it with anyone else, please just note that. And if you're willing to have it be shared as a sort of modest testimonial, that's terrific to me. You don't have to, but feel free to say you don't want to share it. But I really would welcome the feedback, etc. And I want to thank you as well for taking the time on Friday morning to be here. I know you've got a million other things and opportunities to do things, but I hope you've seen how special Mary is and how great the opportunity is to reflect on these values in our own lives. Sometimes it takes a little set aside time to pause and to ask what, to see someone who is a reflective person and putting these values in their life, and then asking ourselves what we can do in that front in our own particular contexts that are unique. And I hope that this has been helpful to you in that sense as well. So thank you very much. Keep in touch with me. We'll have more of these as well coming up the remainder of the semester. So look in the IS newsletter or on our Global Citizenships Project page that you've seen my links to as well. So thanks to everyone. Have a great Friday and a great weekend as best as possible in 15-degree pandemic weather here in Boston. But I appreciate you all. And thanks especially to Mary for taking the time in the middle of the night. I look forward to continuing to work with you and to learn from you in the years ahead. Congratulations on all your great work, and we'll connect again very soon.
Thank you all so much.